Well, hello. Always good to hang out with you. Want to welcome our different campuses, whether you're in Racine or Kenosha or you're watching online. We're always grateful for you taking the time to join us. And of course, our weekends on Wednesday service. There you go. Always energy on Wednesdays. Guys, my name's Dave. I'm one of the pastors around here. And a few weeks ago, we kicked off a series called Guardrails. Now, here's the deal. If you've missed any of the series, you can go to our home page of our website, greatlakechurch.com, click on current series, you can catch up, or this is relatively new around here, you can go to your favorite podcast site, type in Great Lakes Church, and you can hopefully find us right there and listen to us as a podcast. Again, that's relatively new, but we try to make that available and very easy to share with your friends the talks if you feel like it's something that they could benefit from. But in this series called Guardrails, we have been talking about how guardrails are not just an important part of our driving experience, which they are, but they're also an important part of life. And the way we've defined guardrails is this way. We said guardrails are self-imposed standards of behavior that direct and protect our life. Okay, so guardrails are needed in the areas of life that we're a little bit unsure about. Okay, this isn't about don't kill and don't steal and don't hate one another, right? These are more the gray areas of life. And when it comes to the gray areas of life, we need to set up guardrails. And guardrails are not rules, they're not laws, they're not Bible verses, they're not thus saith the Lord. Guardrails are self-imposed standards of behavior, things that we just make a matter of our conscience, and we put them in place in our life in order to direct and protect us. So 3,000 years ago, King Solomon of Israel writes something that becomes the key verse for this series. He writes this: a wise person foresees danger and takes precautions. The foolish goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. If we are wise enough to establish guardrails in our life, they will, or at least they have the potential to protect us from future regrets and from suffering unnecessary consequences. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. In fact, that's what we're talking about all through this series. And for today, I did think it would be fun to start out with a little pop quiz, and it's just going to be one question long. So you either know it or you don't know it. Here it is. Which professional basketball player holds the record for the most missed free throws in a game, a season, and a career? Somebody guessed it. Wilt the Stilt Chamberlain. Yeah. The most missed free throws in a game, a season, and a career. So he was horrendous at shooting free throws. In fact, he was, for the most part, 40% at free throws. That being said, he's one of the greatest basketball players of all time, right? March 2nd, 1962, he actually participated in the greatest game of basketball. It was a cold, wintry night in Hershey, Pennsylvania, right? And Wilt Chamberlain and the Philadelphia Warriors were up against the New York Knicks. And Wilt was already having a great season. He was averaging more than 50 points a game. But on this particular night, he was unstoppable. And at the end of the fourth quarter, does anybody know how many points he scored? 100. Yeah, we got someone who knows their basketball. 100 points in one game. And one of the most memorable things about this particular game is that when it came to free throws, he made 28 of the 32 free throws he took. So almost 90% of his free throws he made. And actually, he had done that all season long. And the reason he made free throws on that particular night, and again throughout that season, is he was shooting underhand. Okay, rather than shooting how he typically would, he would shot underhand. Does anybody know the name of that shot? Yeah, Wilt the Stilt was taking granny shots. But it worked for him. And it made him successful in that season. And then here's what's interesting. Without any real explanation at all, in the following seasons, he went back to shooting the way he typically did. And he was, once again, a terrible, terrible free throw shooter. In his autobiography, here's what he writes about how he shot. He says, I felt silly, like a sissy. I know we don't use words like that anymore. But I felt like a sissy shooting underhanded. I know I was wrong. I know some of the best foul shooters in history shot that way. Even now, the best one in the NBA, Rick Barry, shoots underhanded. I just couldn't do it. So this is incredible. Even though granny shots absolutely work for him, and there was nothing wrong with doing it that way, he couldn't get himself to do it because it just felt silly. It felt ridiculous. And I think this is how a lot of people feel about guardrails, right? It just kind of feels silly. Since most people don't establish guardrails in their life, it just kind of feels awkward, it feels unnatural, it feels like maybe even I'm being a little self-righteous. And so for whatever reason, it's easy for us just to dismiss the idea of guardrails and choose not to do it. And yet, history has proven that people who do set up guardrails have fewer regrets, and they avoid the potential consequences of so many things by using wisdom and establishing guardrails. And so as we talk about that today, I want to talk about setting up guardrails with our work. Now, this is a really important topic because you know this, we spend a whole lot of time working, a huge percentage of our life. Even if you're not currently employed, my guess is you work. You do chores around the house, right? You cook meals, you fix things, you have lots of obligations, you have long to-do lists. So even if you're unemployed or you're retired, there's still work to be done. Now for me, I started my first official job when I was 12 years old. Okay? My brothers and I, we were entrepreneurs, so we started Nelson's Lawn Mowing Service. And it quickly grew into an empire. Like by the end of our first summer, we had pretty much taken over our block. We had like 3 lawns on our block that we were doing. It was awesome. And then when I was 15, I had to be a little independent. I started branching out on my own, doing some of my own things. I mowed lawns for Village Inn in Kenosha and Village Inn in Racine. And that was awesome. But then it got to the point that I was like, man, I need a little bit more purpose in my life because it was obvious God had not gifted me in mowing lawns. I actually didn't do that great of a job at it. And so I took a job making hamburgers and fries at McDonald's on Pershing Boulevard in 75th Street in Kenosha and was making $3.80 an hour. Woo! And then just chasing more purpose. I started working at Six Flags, and I worked in the games area. And I spent a summer guessing people's age and their weight and their date of birth. Now that may intimidate some of you. I loved it. But by the time I was 16 years old, my resume pretty much qualified me to work at a carnival. I mean, that's pretty much what I was ready to do, right? And then I moved to Minneapolis to go to college there. I worked as a telemarketer for a while. Oh, man, the job from Satan. And then I applied at UPS. I was trained at UPS and just immature teenager or young adult. I didn't even show up to my first day of work. After all of that, I didn't even show up to my first day of work. And it still makes me feel a little awkward inside. Then I ended up working at the old spaghetti factory in Minneapolis. And as long as I can remember, I've had some sort of job. And I'm guessing the same is true with you. Work's just a big part of life. And matter of fact, when most of us aren't working, we're watching TV shows about work. Right? The Office. Parks and Recreation, House of Cards, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Better Call Saul, Suits, Breaking Bad. We spend a huge amount of our time either working or watching shows about work. In fact, it's estimated that 1/3 of our life is spent working. And so if we're going to spend that much time on anything in life, we might as well set up some guardrails so we don't get to the end of whatever we're doing and have a bunch of regrets. Now, Bronnie Ware is an Australian nurse. Right? This lady has spent a significant amount of her of time in her life working with individuals on the final months of their life. All right, so she has a lot of patients who are dying, and she started getting in a routine where she would ask her patients about their life and ask them about some of the things they're proud of and some of the things they regret. And she did this long enough and accumulated enough information that finally she wrote a book on it called The Regrets, or 5 Regrets of the Dying. And it's not going to shock any of you to learn that one of the top regrets, in fact, it was number 2, was this regret. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Here's what Bronnie writes about that. She says, this regret came from every male patient that I nursed. They missed their children's youth and their partner's companionship. Women also spoke of this regret, but as most were from an older generation, many of the female patients had not been breadwinners. All of the men I nursed deeply regretted spending so much of their lives on the treadmill of a work existence. So they regretted how they prioritized their life. They regretted neglecting the people who absolutely mattered the most to them. And so again, probably doesn't surprise anybody that work is often associated with regret. There are some who regret that they were never able to find a career that better fit their gifts and their passions. There are people who regret never identifying even what their gifts and their passions were. There are people who regret allowing the stress and the demands of their job turn them into a very toxic or difficult person. There are people who regret wasting years of their life in a career where they were never able to discover purpose. There are people who they look back and they regret bringing such little energy and such little passion into their job because they feel like, man, they could have gone so much further and accomplished so much more if they would have just taken it more seriously. Others regret the types of jobs that they do because they're always discouraged and they never feel like they have the skill set or the abilities to live up to expectations. Lots of regrets attached to our work. And so if we're going to avoid or we're going to minimize the regrets as it relates to work, we have to put up guardrails. So let me give you 3 guardrails today. Here we go. Guardrail number 1. I must get to a point, if I don't just want to waste years of my life, that I refuse to minimize my work. That I just refuse to talk bad about it. I refuse to belittle it. I refuse to downplay it. Because if I don't think that my work has purpose, if I don't think that my work has value, here's the deal. I'm not going to bring a whole lot of energy and passion into it. I'm not going to really help move the organization forward. Your work, whatever it is, has purpose. Now, I'm assuming you're not a hitman or, a con artist. I'm assuming you don't sit behind your computer all day making viruses, all right? And so when I say your work matters, it matters. Let me just put it this way and kind of break it down and give you a little bit of a picture here. If you are a server, if you own a restaurant, if you own a grocery store, you probably never think of it this way, but you are an answer to a short little sentence in the Lord's Prayer that goes like this: give us today our daily bread. You feed people. And it's easy to forget that, right? But of course, you don't do it alone. There's so many people involved, and you start to realize that every career, every industry, every job matters, right? It takes a farmer to plant a seed and harvest the grain. And then it takes a baker to turn flour into bread. And then it takes a truck driver to deliver the bread to the appropriate places. And then it takes someone in advertising and in marketing to promote that bread. And then it takes a chef to prepare a meal. And of course, eventually it takes the server to deliver the meal. All of those individuals are being used of God to provide us with daily food or daily bread. What you do matters. Now, in the early years of Israel's history, before they ever owned property and before they ever owned land, the Israelites spent 4 decades in the desert. It's a lot of time in the desert. And during that time, they didn't have some big elaborate temple because they didn't have anything permanent. And so what they had was a portable place of worship called the tabernacle. And the tabernacle, this is a model of it, it included some very elaborate furnishings inside of it. And when we read about the building of the tabernacle, we come across 2 very obscure names. These aren't names we talk a lot about in a church setting. Their names are Bezaleel and Oholiab. And what's interesting about these 2 individuals is Moses, who wrote the book of Exodus that we're about to read from in just a moment here, he refers to these individuals, as people, as men filled with God's Spirit. And he says that not in the context of, they're doing great mission work around the world, not they're speaking to crowds of tens of thousands of people, not that they're starting some sort of nonprofit. He talks about them being filled with God's Spirit in the context of their craftsmanship. Here's what Moses writes. Then the Lord said to Moses, so he's referring to himself, look, I have specifically chosen Bezaleel. I have filled him with the Spirit of God, giving him great wisdom, ability, and expertise in all kinds of crafts. He is a master craftsman, expert in working with gold, silver, and bronze. He is skilled in engraving and mounting gemstones and in carving wood. He is a master at every craft, and I have personally appointed Oholiab to be his assistant. Moreover, I have given him special skill to all the gifted craftsmen. I've given special skill to all the gifted craftsmen so they can make all the things I have commanded you to make. So work is supposed to be this expression of our gifts and our passions and our talents. But even if your work really doesn't align with your gifts and passions and talents, when you bring your heart into it, when you do your best, Man, it honors God. So whatever you are doing with your time in regards to work, do not minimize it. If you're a school teacher, you're molding little minds, right? From a young age, you're helping teach them their value. If you're a stay-at-home parent, you're shaping the next generation. You are providing security for your kids. If you work in some aspect of the government, you're bringing order, you're bringing protection to society, you're safeguarding other human beings. If you're a contractor, you're taking raw materials of sand and cement and you're using them to build and create things. If you're an artist, you're using the materials of color or music to arrange them into art. If you're a lawyer, you're taking the principles of justice and you're codifying them into laws that benefit society. It matters, right? And all work is important to God. And so guardrail number one, if I don't want to get to the end of my life and feel like I wasted 1/3 of my life in doing some sort of work, and I want to avoid as many regrets as possible as it relates to my career, I must get into a habit where I refuse to minimize my work. I refuse to talk bad about it. I refuse to downplay it. I must understand it has significance and it matters. That's the first guardrail. Second guardrail is this. I must refuse to approach my work half-heartedly. It is up to me to determine how much energy and passion and focus I'm going to bring to my work. And a lot of the energy and passion and focus that I bring really has to do with how I see my work, how I view it. And there's lots of ways that I could see my work. I can see my work as a means to an end, right? Just as a way of getting a paycheck. I could see my work as a necessary evil because I've just got to put food on the table. I need food and clothing and shelter. I could see my work as something that gives me my identity and it fulfills who I am in life. I could see my work as something that's completely meaningless. And it may surprise you, but King Solomon of Israel, at one point in his life, he came to that conclusion. Here's what he writes. What do people get in this life for all their hard work and anxiety? Their days of labor are filled with pain and grief. Even at night, their minds cannot rest. It is all meaningless. Right, he wasn't exactly the Tony Robbins, walk on hot coals of his day. It wasn't like, we're going to take the world and everything you do matters. And no. And yet, I reference what Solomon writes here because I think a lot of us feel that way from time to time. How I view my work matters. If I view it as meaningless or nothing more than a paycheck, then here's the deal. Then my work ethic or the quality of my work really isn't going to matter to me all that much. If I just see my work as a necessary evil, well, then it doesn't matter who I walk all over. It doesn't matter if I'm overbearing to my employees. It is what it is. We just got to get stuff done, right? Or if I see work as like all-encompassing for my identity and everything I am is caught up in my work, well, then I can just justify being dishonest. I can justify taking advantage of people because, hey, at the end of the day, I'm just trying to build my reputation as a person who just gets stuff done. And so one of the best guardrails that we can choose to establish in our life as it relates to our work is just to refuse to approach it half-heartedly. And ultimately, the way we do this is to make the choice to say, I'm going to view my work as worship to God, as a way of honoring God. Now, that's somewhat of a challenge because in life, we typically view things in two different ways. We say, well, it's spiritual or it's unspiritual, right? It's sacred or it's secular. But for followers of Jesus, everything is spiritual. For followers of Jesus, everything is sacred. All of life is meant to be an expression of worship to God and to bring honor to Him. The Apostle Paul in the first century, he writes a letter in which he addresses this. Here's how he puts it. He says, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. So the way we interact with our coworkers or employees, it matters. The way we handle conflict with our boss, that matters. The way we handle ourselves in business, the way we approach our responsibilities, our character in our work, all of that matters. It should all be viewed as worship. In another letter he writes in the first century, here's what Paul writes about work. He says, work willingly at whatever you do, as though you were working for the Lord rather than for people. So he says, hey, wherever you find yourself on the job spectrum, you're the employee, you're the employer, you're the boss, you're the manager, Or you're paid hourly, you're paid salary, you're a temporary employee, you're in a career, whatever it is. He says, I want you to view your heavenly Father as your boss. Bring your energy, bring your best. Do it with a positive attitude. And of course, our pushback is like, oh, dear God, do you even know what I do? Right? All I do is fix things. All I do is put computers together. All I do is sell things. All I do is, fix roads. Or all I do is hold signs while other people fix roads. Or all I do is hold signs while dressed like a cell phone outside of Verizon Wireless, just hoping my friends never recognize me, right? If you had a clue what I do, there's no way you'd say, be enthusiastic about it. But Paul says, I want you to look at your work as if God is your boss. And so anytime that I use my gifts and my passions to cultivate and create, or anytime, because that's not always possible in every job, and I realize that, anytime we bring ourselves and we just do our best, it honors God. And that ultimately is what he's asking for us. In fact, one time Jesus is teaching, and here's what he says to his audience. He says, you are the light of the world, like a city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden. And then he goes on and he explains what this means. He says, let your good deeds shine out for all to see so that everyone will praise your heavenly Father. So when somebody looks at your work ethic, when somebody looks at your integrity, when somebody looks at the quality of your work, when somebody looks at how you bring yourself and your energy into your work, when somebody looks at how you treat your coworkers, when somebody looks at how you interact with someone in your workplace who you disagree with, when somebody looks at how you conduct yourself in business, it ought to glorify God. The goal should be that when people around you look at you, they would connect the dots between how you do your work and your love for your heavenly Father. Later on in the same teaching, Jesus makes his audience really uncomfortable. Here's what he says. He says, if a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, carry it 2 miles. Now, the context for what Jesus is saying here is huge. All right, you probably remember this from history class, but Rome in the first century was a gigantic empire. They controlled most of the world. It included lots of different provinces that were connected through 50,000 miles of stone-paved roads. And the reason Rome was such a powerful empire is they had established the best military in the world. And so all throughout the different regions and different provinces, what Rome did is they put different soldiers there to kind of keep the peace and make sure people did what they were supposed to do. It wasn't overbearing, but they just made sure that there was order. But having placed soldiers all throughout the empire, there was a law that was enforced in different provinces, and it was true for the Jewish people. They hated this law, and it was basically this, that a Roman soldier could go up to you and say, I need you to carry my baggage. I need you to carry my gear for me. And by law, you would have to carry it a mile. It weighed like 66 pounds. I mean, it was not light stuff. And so the Jewish people hated this. And Jesus, knowing they hated it, still said this, if a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, carry it 2 miles. This is just ridiculous, right? Jesus says, don't respond, don't defend, don't retaliate, don't even do what you're asked to do. Do more than you're asked to do. And as irritating as it is, this is a theme all throughout the teachings of Jesus. Jesus calls his followers to go above and beyond what they are asked. Why? Because everything in our life is worship. Everything in our life is supposed to bring honor to God. Everything is supposed to point towards our Heavenly Father, even our work. And so practically speaking, if you say, you know what, I don't want to get to the end of my life and feel like I wasted it at work, my encouragement to you is to establish a guardrail. Nobody can force you to do it. Nobody can make you do it. Nobody can twist your arm. Something you got to do. But establish a guardrail that says, I'm not going to approach my work in a half-hearted way. And if you say, okay, I think I'm there. I think I want to bring my energy into it. 2 important questions you can ask. Number 1, what can I do to help? And number 2, how can I add value? What can I do to help my boss? What can I do to help my coworkers? What can I do to help my employees? What can I do to help move this organization forward? And number 2, how can I add value? Because when we can train ourselves and train our hearts and make this a discipline in our life, and we begin to set up these guardrails, I'm telling you, we're going to get to the end of our life and we're going to look back at the 1/3 of it or 50% of it for some of you, right? How much time we spent working on it, and we're going to say, yeah, I don't really regret it. I did my best. I have very few things I would go back and undo. So that's the second guardrail. I must refuse to approach my work half-heartedly. Third one is this. I must proactively determine how much time I want to spend working. Like you and I have to decide for ourselves. Nobody can decide it for us. We have to decide here in this season of my life, and it's going to change from season to season based on the age of your kids and based on kind of where you're at and where your marriage is at and different things. But I need to proactively decide and determine how much time I'm going to spend working. And I know the pushback, I wish I could control that because I would work 5 hours a week, right? I wish I could control that. I don't have a lot of control. Let me tell you, you and your human willpower is way bigger than you think it is. When we determine we're going to do something, come on, man, let's be honest. We figure out a way to do it. Our minds, our willpower, it's like we can make things happen. Now, it's the fall, so I'm putting a hunting story in here somewhere. All right, I was out hunting this past weekend, and my buddy Charlie, who I was with, he ended up shooting a buck. And he came into the cabin after sunset, so it's pitch dark outside, and he said, guys, got some bad news. I shot a buck, but I shot it low. Obviously, he doesn't have the same aim that I have, but he shot it low, and he said, bottom line is it took off, and I wasn't able to find it. And so his son-in-law, Greg, who was hunting with us, we decided, well, let's have dinner and then let's go out and look for this thing. And so we go outside, pitch black, we've got flashlights, and we see some blood on some plants and some grass, and it's like a little bit here. And I don't know if you've ever tracked a deer. I'm guessing that's not something you do regularly, right? But it is not the easiest thing to do. We tracked this blood trail in dark with little flashlights for about an hour and a half. The length of 6 football fields in the woods. We got totally lost. But ladies and gentlemen, we found it. It was a beautiful 8-point buck. Oh, look, we got clapping, right? Oh, yeah. I've decided to not show the picture because I know how some of you animal rights activists are, and I want to be in good graces with you. And just know, it was beautiful. And so, but it's interesting. We look back and we were totally lost even when we found it, and it took another half an hour to kind of find our way out of there and get the deer. It was just crazy. But it's amazing the human willpower when we're determined to do something. And so you have to determine for yourself what you're going to do. It may be 40 hours a week, maybe 50, 60 hours a week. Again, there's no right or wrong in this. You have to decide for yourself. But here's what you need to be reminded of, and here's what I need to be reminded of. Regardless of what we decide and say in this season of my life, here's what I'm doing. There's never going to be enough time to return all the phone calls and all the emails. There's never going to be enough time to follow up on every potential client and to complete every task that was assigned at every meeting. There's not going to be enough time to still dream big for the future and do everything you want to do for the future. There's not enough time in life, right? Our life is like a rubber band. It's made to stretch. It's made to expand. But at some point, if there's too much tension, if we're doing too much, what happens? It breaks. And it's just true. There's just so many demands in our life that without thinking about it, our life just snaps. Our life starts breaking down and it feels overwhelming. And because it's impossible to get everything done in this life that we want to get done, I'm not just talking about work. I'm talking about the time we need to spend with our friends, the time we need to be refreshing ourselves, golfing, hunting, whatever it is for you, right? The time that we need to be spending with our kids. You just listen, there's just not enough time in the day. And so what ends up happening, just naturally, all of us do this, is we cheat from one area of life and we try to give it to another area of life. Right? We cheat from our golf game and the practice it needs because yard work has to be done. Or we cheat ourselves of the much needed sleep because we're up late responding to emails. Or we cheat having dinner with our family because we're out grabbing drinks with a new client, or we're staying up late working on a project. Or we cheat our friends of the time they need to be hanging out and developing and deepening our friendship in order to be with our family. We're constantly cheating things in life. And here's what we all have in common. We've all been given the exact same amount of time every day. And so we have to choose where we are going to cheat because there isn't enough time to give everybody and everything exactly what it deserves. Now, the reason I bring this up, because we cheat things all the time. The reason I bring this up is because if we're honest, the one area of life that we rarely cheat is our work, which is understandable. Because if we have 2 extra hours to give to something, it's easy to give it to work because that's measurable. There's something we can get checked off the list. And if we do enough measurable things, what happens? We get promoted, we get a bonus, we get rewarded at the end of the year, somebody gives us a trophy. We can build a nicer home, we can accomplish more things. But if we take those 2 extra hours that we have and we give them to our home, here's the problem. If we give them to our family, all we've done is just give them to our family. There's nothing really measurable that happened there, right? Nobody at the end of the year says, hey, Dad, I want to give you a trophy. You spent a lot of time with me this year. And so the challenge of cheating our work in order to give time to our family is we often don't see the effects of our presence until years later. The problem is at some point we will see the effects of our absence. And so when you give to your employer or small business or any other arena of life, the time that belongs to your family, you are cheating. And again, we all do this in every arena of life, but we have to choose where we're going to cheat. We all take time from one arena of life and use it in order to pursue another arena of life. So in that regards, we're all cheating someone or something. The question is, who are you going to cheat? The reason family's so hard to cheat or so easy to cheat is because our family loves us and they understand our schedule. And so they do their best to work with it. And they just say, hey, Dad, I understand. Mom, I understand. You got a lot of things to do. I get it. But here's what it's like. And we'll wrap up with this, right? It's like you asking me to hold something for you that's really heavy. Now, for the average person, this is heavy. This isn't that big of a deal for me, but it's like you, hey, Dave, could you carry that for me and just hold it for me? And I said, well, why? And you try to explain it, but it doesn't make much sense to me. But I trust you, and I'm trying to be a good friend. You're just like, dude, I can't let that touch the ground. So I'm like, okay, yeah, I got it. And then you just kind of go off and do your thing, and people come by and they're like, Dave, why are you holding it? Well, my good buddy Mike, man, he asked me to hold it for him, and so I'm holding it. And I'm hoping Mike comes back pretty soon. And an hour goes by and 2 hours goes by and it's getting exhausted. Now it's getting to the point I can barely hold it. And finally, Mike comes back in the room and he's like, Dave, thank you for holding it. I'm like, oh, man, I'm so glad. Can you hold it for 10 more minutes? And he doesn't give me a lot of explanation. I'm saying, here's what's going to happen. Eventually, my mental willingness to hold this cinder block is going to be overcome by my physical weakness. As much as I want to hold it, I'm eventually going to drop it. And this is what happens in our families. We say, hey, can you just hold the responsibilities? I got to get this job done. I got to return these clients' phone calls. I got to travel some more. I got to do this. And they're sitting there saying, Dad, Mom, we love you. Do whatever. Yeah, we get it. But at some point, if we're not paying attention, their mental willingness to hold the responsibilities and take care of the things at home will eventually give way. And the physical weakness, they're eventually going to drop it. And at that point, we're going to be like, what happened? Why did you drop it? And we're going to be upset. I don't know. I mean, come on. I asked you to take care of it. But it wasn't that they didn't want to. It's just they were just unable to for so long. And the temptation is when we see the stress on our family, the temptation is to say, hey, God, I'm just trying to provide for my family. I'm trying to take care of this stuff. So will you please fill in the gaps? Can I just tell you, that's a horrible prayer. Because I've never met anybody in my life who said, Mom and Dad were gone all the time. They were never really involved in my life, but man, God filled in the gaps, and I'm so glad for that. It's because as much as they want to hold, whatever it is that you ask them to hold, eventually physical weakness will overcome the mental desire to hold it. So, Solomon writes this, for everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heaven. God created work, he created family, he created friends, he created hobbies, he created everything that we get to enjoy. But it's up to us to determine, hey, how much time am I going to give to all these different arenas? And you know this, if you do not proactively decide how much time you're going to give it, someone else is going to decide for you. Don't get to the end of your life and say, man, I wasted a lot of time at work. I feel like I worked way too much, or I feel like what I did wasn't significant. Put guardrails in place. Refuse to minimize my work. refuse to approach my work half-heartedly, and proactively determine how much time I want to spend working. That being said, I held a cinder block for about 1 minute and I'm sweating. I don't know what is wrong right now. Guys, your work matters. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, I pray today that you would help all of us wrestle through the issues as it relates to the work that we do. Even for those who are unemployed or maybe retired, and how the different jobs and to-do lists and tasks around the house can just pile up and pile up and pile up and keep us from doing what's most important. I pray give us all the wisdom to know what to do with what we just heard and give us courage to do it. In Jesus' name, amen.